Your call sign is dishes. Cole Harrington laughed, snatching her helmet straight off the floor and raising it above his head for the entire chow hall to see. What did you do to earn that scrub the pots after dinner? 400 elite soldiers turned to look. The woman didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even lift her eyes from her book. She just let him stand there holding her helmet like a man who had just won something enormous. That absolute stillness should have been his warning. It wasn't, because some men only learn the difference between confidence and arrogance at the exact moment it costs them everything. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell so you never miss a story, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from right now. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The dining facility at Forward Operating Base Raven Ridge was never designed for comfort. It was designed for function. Long metal tables, plastic chairs bolted too close together, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead and made everyone look a little more exhausted than they probably were. The smell was always the same diesel fuel from the vehicles parked outside, mixing with whatever protein-heavy meal the kitchen had produced that night. Coffee, boot rubber, the faint metallic edge of gear that had spent too much time in the field. But nobody came to Raven Ridge for comfort. They came because they were the best at what they did. Rangers, force recon operators, combat search and rescue specialists, special forces teams rotating between missions. Every person sitting in that chow hall on that Tuesday evening had earned their seat through years of grinding, painful, relentless training that weeded out everyone who wasn't built for this specific kind of life. And they knew it. That was the thing about elite military dining facilities that civilians never quite understood. But it wasn't just a place to eat. It was a theater, a performance space, a room where reputations were maintained and extended every single night through the stories you told, the way you carried yourself, and most importantly, the way the people around you reacted when you walked in. Staff Sergeant Cole Harrington walked in the way he always did, like he owned the floor beneath him. Cole was 31 years old, built like someone had assembled him specifically for the purpose of surviving things that should not be survivable. 6 feet 2 inches. Shoulders wide enough that he had to turn slightly sideways to move through narrow doorways comfortably. A jaw that looked like it had been carved out of something harder than regular bone. He had a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his temple, a souvenir from a rooftop breach in a country he wasn't allowed to name in any report that used his real name. He had been Marine Force Recon for 7 years. He had deployed 4 times. He had done things in service to his country that would never appear in any official document. And he had earned the complete and total respect of every person in his unit, which meant that when Cole Harrington spoke, people listened, and when Cole Harrington laughed, people laughed with him, because that was how it worked in this world. And Cole understood that dynamic perfectly and used it the way a craftsman uses a familiar tool. He dropped his tray onto the table beside his teammate, Lance Corporal Derek Torch Bowman. Torch was younger, 24, barely a real person yet, in Cole's opinion still carrying that eager-to-impress energy that either got hammered out of you by your 3rd deployment or got you killed on your 1st. He was a good Marine, competent, fast learner. But he still watched Cole the way young Marines always watch the veterans, with that particular combination of admiration and anxiety that Cole had long since stopped finding either flattering or annoying. It was just part of the landscape. "Rough one?" Torch asked, looking at Cole's tray. Cole sat down heavily. "Everyone's rough. That's what makes it worth doing." Sergeant First Class Dominic Hound Riordan slid in across from them, already eating. Hound was Cole's peer, same experience level, same deployment, count, different branch. Army Special Forces. They had met on a joint training exercise 18 months ago and had immediately understood each other in the way that only people shaped by identical pressure can understand each other. No explanation needed, no preamble, just recognition. "You hear about the command rotation?" Hound asked without looking up. "Heard something." Cole pulled apart a bread roll. "Nobody's talking straight about it." "Nobody ever does when it involves that unit." Torch looked between them. "Which unit?" Cole and Hound both looked at him. "The one you don't ask questions about until you're invited to ask questions about," Cole said. Torch went back to eating. The chow hall was filling up fast. That was the rhythm of Raven Ridge, Everything happened at the same time because everyone operated on the same brutal schedule. Training ran until 1800. Personal maintenance and equipment checks ran until 1900. Chow was the 1 hour when everybody in the facility converged in the same physical space, which meant the room went from empty to packed in about 12 minutes flat every single night. Cole was midway through his meal when he noticed her. It wasn't that she was doing anything remarkable. That was actually the problem. She was sitting alone at a table near the far corner of the room, not hidden exactly, but not visible from the main entrance either. A spot that someone who knew the layout would choose deliberately if they wanted to eat in peace without being immediately swept into the social current of the room. She was small, not fragile, that was a different thing entirely, and Cole was experienced enough to know the difference, but compact. Precise in her dimensions, like someone who had never had the luxury of carrying any extra anything. She was wearing a faded tactical jacket that had clearly seen field conditions more than once. The elbows were worn through in a way that took genuine time to achieve. Her hair was pulled back tightly enough that it disappeared. No visible unit patch on the jacket, no name tape visible from this angle. She was reading a book, a paperback that had been bent back on itself so many times that the spine had given up entirely and the cover was barely attached. What caught Cole's eye was the helmet beside her chair. It was sitting on the floor next to her boots, tilted slightly, and painted across the back in the flat utilitarian lettering that operators use for call signs was a single word. Dishes. Cole stared at it. He actually had to look twice because he assumed he had misread it. Dishes. He picked up his coffee cup and looked at Hound. You seeing what I'm seeing over there? Hound glanced toward the corner without making it obvious. See a lot of things. The call sign. Hound looked again. A beat passed. Then a small expression crossed his face that wasn't quite a smile but was in that neighborhood. Interesting choice. Interesting. Cole set down his coffee. It's not interesting. It's a joke. Who lets someone run a call sign like that in a facility like this? Torch leaned over before he could stop himself. What call sign? What are we looking at? Corner. Faded jacket. Read the helmet. Torch looked. His face went through the same sequence. Cole's had confusion, recognition, and then a kind of delighted disbelief. Dishes, is that a real call sign, or did she write that herself as a joke? That's what I want to know, Cole said. The thing about call signs in elite military culture was that they were not decorative. They were not chosen by the person who carried them. They were assigned almost always against the carrier's preference, and they almost always derived from one of two sources: a moment of extraordinary competence, or a moment of extraordinary failure, and sometimes both at once. The call sign became a permanent shorthand for something that the unit needed to remember about you. Hound had his call sign because, on his second deployment, he had tracked a high-value target for 11 days through 3 different countries without losing the scent once. Cole's call sign ridgeline came from a moment that his unit talked about in a specific tone of voice that made new people go quiet and listen. But dishes, Cole ran through the possibilities in his head. He was a man who respected the language of his profession, and that language had rules, and a call sign like dishes violated every single one of them, unless there was a story behind it that he wasn't seeing. And the problem was that his brain kept sliding toward the obvious interpretation, and the obvious interpretation was that this woman was either a support staff member who had adopted the call sign as self-deprecating humor, or worse, that someone had given it to her as a straight-up dismissal. He stood up before he had fully decided to do it. That was the thing about Cole Harrington. He was extraordinarily competent at the things competent people are trained to be competent at. But he had a blind spot, and the blind spot was this: he confused familiarity with knowledge, and he confused confidence with understanding. And when those two errors combined in a social situation, they produced a very specific kind of mistake that smart men made with a very specific kind of woman. He picked up his coffee cup, walked across the chow hall, and stopped beside her table. She didn't look up. He waited 1 full second, which was longer than he normally waited for anything. She turned a page. Captain, he said, reading the rank on her collar. He made the word sound neutral, but it wasn't. She looked up then. Her eyes were a kind of gray that didn't photograph well and probably wasn't anyone's first choice of dramatic eye color. But that in person had a quality to it that Cole's brain registered and immediately filed in a category he couldn't name. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they have already classified and are simply confirming the classification of. Staff Sergeant, she said. Flat, even, not cold exactly, just precise. Cole Harrington, Force Recon. He gestured toward her helmet. I couldn't help noticing the call sign. Most people do, she said. She didn't offer anything else. She didn't explain. She didn't fill the silence that followed, which was unusual because most people, when confronted by a large and confident Marine who has walked across a room to address them, feel a social pressure to fill the silence. She did not feel that pressure, or she felt it and had long since made peace with not responding to it. Cole smiled, the smile that worked on most people. Dishes, he said, that's an unusual one. Yes. Most call signs, you know they mean something. Hound over there, he tracked a target halfway across Central Asia. Ridgeline, that's mine. There's a specific reason for it. He paused. I'm just wondering what the story is on yours. Elena Whitmore closed her book. She didn't do it quickly or with any drama. She simply closed it, put it face down on the table and looked at him with the same unreadable expression she'd had since he walked up and said, something happened in a kitchen. Cole blinked. A kitchen? Yes. That's the whole story. No, she said, that's all you need. And there it was, the thing that should have stopped him. Any reasonable person reading that interaction would have recognized that the woman sitting in front of Cole had just politely but absolutely clearly communicated that the conversation was over and that he was not going to get what he came for, and that the wisest thing to do was nod and walk back to his table. Cole was not in that moment operating at his wisest. Behind him, he could hear Torch and Hound watching. He could feel the attention of the nearby tables, the particular alertness that groups of competitive people display when they sense a social challenge unfolding between two people they're observing. He looked at the helmet again, at that single word. You know, he said, and his voice had picked up a quality that was not quite a laugh, but was in the family of a laugh. In my experience, call signs that come from kitchen incidents are usually either very funny or very embarrassing. He tilted his head. Which one is yours? For a long moment, Elena Whitmore said nothing. Then she picked up her water bottle, took a slow drink, set it back down with a precision that was somehow neither dismissive nor accommodating, and said, Staff Sergeant Harrington, in my experience, the people who need to understand a call sign usually figure it out on their own eventually. She held his gaze. You seem smart enough. Cole opened his mouth, and then the chow hall changed. It didn't announce itself. No build-up, no preamble, no warning sound of the kind that gives you time to prepare your face for what's coming. The speakers above the room came alive, not with music or a routine announcement, but with something different. A classified frequency tone that operated at a specific pitch that anyone with field experience would recognize the way they recognized a weapon being cocked in a dark room. Not loud, not dramatic, just unmistakably, absolutely significant. And then the voice. Attention all personnel. Authorization code Whiskey Bravo 7 confirmed. Operation IRONVEIL is active. All assigned and personnel report to primary staging within 15 minutes. The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds in which Cole watched something happen that he had never seen in 7 years of military service. 400 people stopped moving. Not the way people stop when they're surprised. Not the frozen-in-place reaction of people who don't know what to do. This was different. This was the stillness of people who know exactly what the words mean and are taking exactly one breath to process the weight of them. And then the chairs started moving. Not one or two, not a section of the room, all of them. The sound was like a tide going out, that low continuous scrape of 400 chairs pulling back from 400 tables simultaneously, the kind of sound that your body understands as significant before your mind has fully processed why. Cole turned around slowly. Every operator in the room was standing. Rangers he recognized from a joint exercise in the mountains 6 weeks ago. Special Forces teams he had seen in and out of the briefing rooms over the past month. Combat rescue operators who had more hours in hostile airspace than most people had in anything. People who had earned the kind of credibility that made Cole's own credibility look like an early draft. Every single one of them was standing, and every single one of them was looking at the corner table, at the woman with the faded jacket, at the call sign that said dishes. Cole's stomach dropped about 4 inches. He turned back to look at Elena Whitmore. She was already standing. She moved without urgency, but also without wasting a single motion, picking up her book, sliding it into a side pocket of her jacket, reaching down and lifting the helmet from the floor, with the practiced ease of someone who had done exactly this in circumstances that made a chow hall look very, very simple. She looked at Cole, not triumphantly, not with any visible satisfaction about whatever was clearly showing on his face. Just looked at him with those gray eyes that had already classified him and were now waiting for him to catch up to the classification. "You'll want to get your gear, Staff Sergeant," she said quietly. "We move in 12 minutes." And she walked past him. 400 standing operators parted around her like water. Cole stood exactly where he was in the middle of the suddenly emptying chow hall, holding his coffee cup, trying to reconcile the conversation of the last 4 minutes with the reality of what had just happened in front of him. Hound appeared at his elbow. "Close your mouth," Hound said not unkindly. "People will think you've never seen this before." "I haven't," Cole said. "Well, no." Hound agreed. "Neither have I." Torch was already moving toward the exit, pulled along by the current of people who knew exactly where they were going. Cole turned to follow and then stopped. Looked back once at the corner table. The book was gone. The helmet was gone. The water bottle was gone. Nothing left to indicate that anyone had been sitting there at all, except that faint impression in the plastic chair, the kind that takes a while to fade. Cole turned away from it and moved with the current. In 12 minutes, they would all be at primary staging. In 12 minutes, Cole would learn something about the woman he had just spent 5 minutes publicly laughing at. In 12 minutes, the entire architecture of his understanding of what strength looked like would begin to develop a crack that would eventually split it wide open. But right now, moving through the hallway toward the gear room, surrounded by operators who were all moving with the same tight, controlled urgency, Cole Harrington felt the specific, deeply uncomfortable sensation of someone who has committed a mistake and has not yet understood the full dimensions of it. The helmet had said dishes. 400 people had stood up. One woman had walked out of the room without looking back. And somewhere ahead in the darkness of the Black Ridge Mountains, people were waiting to be found. Cole did not yet know that the most important lesson of his 7-year career was about to begin. He did not yet know that the woman he had laughed at had already survived things that would have broken most people in that room. He did not yet know what had happened in a kitchen overseas 2 years earlier, in a compound that did not appear on any official map on a night when everything went wrong, and one person refused to let wrong be the final answer. He didn't know any of that yet, but he was about to. He grabbed his gear. He checked his weapons. He followed the woman with the call sign that everyone else in that room had already learned to respect. And for the first time in a very long time, Staff Sergeant Cole Harrington, Force Recon Marine, decorated operator man who had earned the right to speak loudly in rooms full of elite soldiers, walked into the unknown without the advantage of being the most prepared person in the space. It was an unfamiliar feeling. I didn't like it, but something in the back of his mind, the part that had kept him alive across 4 deployments and 3 continents, told him quietly without drama that not liking it was exactly the right reaction. The worst thing he could do right now was pretend he understood something he didn't. He had already done that once tonight. He was not going to do it again. The aircraft hangar was 200 meters from the dining facility, and the cold hit him as soon as he stepped outside, the particular cold of high-altitude mountain air in November that didn't just sit on your skin, but found its way through clothing and settled against your bones like it intended to stay. He had felt cold like this before. He knew how to move through it without letting it become a distraction. Around him, the other operators were already reconfiguring, adjusting loadouts, checking radios, the quiet and efficient machinery of a professional unit, preparing to do something dangerous. Nobody was talking above a murmur. Nobody was performing confidence. This was the other version of elite soldiers, not the chow hall version, with the loud stories and the competitive energy, but the operational version, stripped down to function, each person cycling through their own internal checklist. Cole found his teammates and moved through his own gear check. Rifle, secondary weapon, medical kit, communications equipment, navigation systems. He did it the way he always did it, methodically, systematically, not rushing, but not pausing either. And while he moved through it, his mind kept returning to the chow hall, to the sound of 400 chairs. He had been in this profession for 7 years, and he had never heard anything like that. He had seen units show respect for command authority. He had seen operators acknowledge rank with the appropriate professional deference. But what he had witnessed in that dining facility was not deference to rank. It was something older than rank, something that rank tried to approximate but never fully replicated. It was recognition. 400 experienced, skeptical, battle-tested professionals had heard a code word and immediately, instinctively stood up. Not for the code word, not for the operation, but for the person associated with it. For the woman who had been sitting in the corner, reading a damaged paperback book and eating her meal in peace before Cole Harrington had walked across the room to make a point about call signs. He snapped a magazine into place, and the sound of it brought him back to the present. This wasn't the time for processing. Processing was something you did later when you were safe. Right now, there was a mission. He followed the current of the unit toward the aircraft. Elena Whitmore was already there. She was standing beside the aircraft ramp, speaking quietly with Master Chief Adrian Caldwell, a man Cole knew by reputation as someone whose reputation alone was enough to make extremely good people extremely careful. Caldwell was 53 years old and looked 45 and had the kind of still, quiet confidence that comes from having been tested at a level that most people never approach. He was listening to Elena with his full attention, which in itself was information. Cole watched from a distance as the exchange continued. Not the body language of a superior briefing a subordinate, the body language of two equals confirming a shared understanding. Caldwell nodded twice, said something short, and stepped aside. Elena turned and looked at the assembled team. Cole registered in that moment something he had completely missed in the chow hall. When she stood in front of the unit, she didn't fill the space by being large. She wasn't physically imposing. She was not the biggest person there, or the loudest, or the most visually dominant, but she filled the space. Some quality that had nothing to do with physical size settled over the assembled operators, like a temperature change, like the pressure dropping before a storm, and every person standing in front of her felt it, and Cole felt it too, and he had a strange and uncomfortable moment of retroactive understanding in which he replayed the last hour of his evening and saw it from a completely different angle. She had not been sitting alone in the corner because she didn't belong. She had been sitting alone in the corner because she was the only person in that room who didn't need the room. Elena spoke. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. The team was already calibrated to her frequency. IRONVEIL is active, she said. Here's what we know. A classified research team, 11 personnel lost contact with Command 62 hours ago while operating in a restricted zone in the Black Ridge sector. Their last known position puts them approximately 9 kilometers inside territory that has shown evidence of organized hostile activity. Satellite imaging from the past 48 hours suggests they are alive and contained. It also suggests that the window for reaching them before that situation changes is narrowing. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. She continued. We have a 12-hour operational window. The terrain does not permit vehicle insertion beyond the first checkpoint. We go on foot from there. Silence discipline is absolute. We are moving through a sector where noise will travel before we do. There will be no air support available for the first 6 hours of the operation due to enemy radar coverage in the valley. She paused. Any questions about the facts I've just given you? Silence. Good. Then here's the rest. Her eyes moved across the assembled team with the same unhurried precision with which she did everything. The research team chose to be in that location for reasons that matter to this country's security. They took a risk that was authorized at the highest level, and that risk has developed into a situation. Our job is not to evaluate the wisdom of the original decision. Our job is to go get them and bring them back. Cole found himself watching the team's faces as she spoke. He had been in enough operational briefings to read the difference between a unit that was being talked at and a unit that was actively listening. This was the second one. The particular quality of attention in front of Elena was the kind that only emerged when people trusted not just the competence, but the judgment of the person speaking. That trust was not new. It had been built over time, over specific events that Cole did not yet know the details of. We leave in 8 minutes, Elena said. Move. The team moved. Cole moved with them, and as he did, walking through the cold toward the aircraft that would carry them into the Black Ridge darkness, the question that had been forming in the back of his mind since the chow hall finally assembled itself into clear language. What had happened in that kitchen? What had a woman done in a compound that put her name on an operation that made 400 elite operators stand up from their meals without being asked? He didn't have the answer yet. But the Black Ridge Mountains were waiting, and the next 12 hours were going to teach him things that 7 years of extraordinary service had never managed to get through to him. He loaded into the aircraft. The ramp closed behind the team. The engines built to a roar. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, 11 people were waiting for someone to come find them. The woman with the call sign dishes was already calculating how to do exactly that. Cole Harrington settled into his seat, checked his gear one final time, and made himself a promise. I was going to pay attention. For once in his considerable career, he was going to stop performing what he already knew and start actually learning something new. The aircraft lifted into the night. Below them, the lights of Raven Ridge grew small and then disappeared. Ahead of them was darkness and cold, in the kind of mission that separated the people who talked about being the best from the people who simply quietly, consistently were. Cole looked across the aircraft at Elena Whitmore. She was studying a topographic map in the low red light, completely focused, completely still. The helmet with a single word on it was secured at her feet. Dishes. Cole stared at it for a long moment. And for the first time since he had walked across that chow hall to make a point about call signs, he felt something that his ego had been successfully blocking for the better part of an hour. Curiosity, not the performative kind that people deploy in social situations to seem interested. The real kind, the kind that means I do not understand something and I need to understand it and I am willing to wait and watch and learn until I do. That was where part one ended. Not with an answer, but with the right question finally being asked by the right person, even if only inside the privacy of his own considerable humbled mind. The aircraft flew north. The mountains waited. And a story that had begun with a laugh in a chow hall was about to become something that nobody in that aircraft would spend the rest of their lives forgetting. The aircraft had been in the air for exactly 19 minutes when Cole Harrington made his first mistake of the operation. Not a tactical mistake. Not the kind that got people killed. Just the kind that revealed something about a man that he would rather have kept hidden. The specific, uncomfortable mistake of asking a question he wasn't ready to hear the answer to. He leaned across the aisle toward Sergeant First Class Dominic Reardon, who was running his thumb along the edge of a topographic map with the focused patience of someone who had done this particular thing in the dark on aircraft moving through turbulence so many times that it had become automatic. Hounded, Cole said low enough that the engine noise covered it from the seats around them. You know anything about her? Hound didn't look up from the map. Define anything. IRONVEIL, why the whole room stood up. Who she actually is. Hound folded the map along a crease that he had clearly made and remade dozens of times. He looked at Cole with the expression of a man who was calculating exactly how much information was useful to share and how much would simply add to a problem that was already taking up too much space. You really want to know now, Hound said, 20 minutes before we insert into the most communications-restricted sector in this entire region. I want to know before we're under her command in the field. Hound looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked across the aircraft at Elena Whitmore, who was sitting with her eyes closed, not sleeping. Cole could tell the difference between a person sleeping and a person running, calculations behind closed eyelids, and this was definitely the second one. What I know, Hound said carefully, is what people say, which is never the same as what actually happened. But what people say is that 2 years ago, she took a team into a compound overseas. Classified location, classified mission, classified everything. You'll never find the official report because the official report doesn't exist in any form that uses her real name. Cole waited. The mission went sideways, Hound continued. Badly sideways. Communications equipment destroyed in the first hour. Extraction helicopter couldn't reach them because the landing zone was compromised. Her team was trapped inside the compound with hostile forces closing in and nothing left to work with except what was physically in the building. What was in the building? Hound almost smiled. A kitchen. The word landed differently than it would have 40 minutes ago before Cole had stood in a chow hall and held a woman's helmet in the air and made a joke about dishwashing. She held her team together for 14 hours, Hound said, using improvised tools, kitchen equipment, things that have no business being used the way she used them. When extraction finally reached them, all 6 members of her team were alive. He paused. The hostile forces that had been closing in on them were not. Cole said nothing. Her team gave her the call sign afterward, Hound said, now as an insult, as the highest form of respect they knew how to give, because she took the worst possible situation. No weapons, no communications, no support, no options, and she found a way. He looked at Cole directly. The kitchen was the battlefield. So dishes is the call sign. Cole sat with that for a moment. Why doesn't anyone know about it? He asked. Plenty of people know about it, Hound said. Just not people who spend their time asking questions about other people's call signs in Ho's chow hall. That landed exactly where Hound intended it to land. Cole turned back to face forward and said nothing else for the remainder of the flight. The aircraft began its descent at the 26-minute mark. The angle was steep, a tactical approach designed to minimize radar exposure, the kind that pushed your stomach up into your chest and reminded your body that you were not in a commercial airplane. And the people flying this machine were making decisions based on survival logic rather than passenger comfort. Cole felt the familiar tightening in his chest that he had learned over 7 years to recognize not as fear, but as his nervous system correctly identifying that something serious was about to begin. He had learned to welcome that sensation. It sharpened his attention. It cleared out everything unnecessary and left only what mattered. What mattered right now was the mission. 11 people in the Black Ridge Mountains, a 12-hour window. A commander he had publicly embarrassed an hour and a half ago. The ramp opened at the back of the aircraft and the cold came in instantly. Not gradually, not politely, but all at once. The way cold and high mountain terrain always arrived, like it had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. Cole pulled his gear in tight and stood with the rest of the team moving toward the ramp, with the compressed efficiency of people who had practiced this transition so many times that thinking about it would only slow them down. Elena was first off the aircraft. Not symbolically, not performatively. She was first because she was the commanding officer, and first off the aircraft was where the commanding officer went, and she did it without looking back to see if anyone was following because she already knew they were, and the knowing was in the way she moved, purposeful and utterly without hesitation. Cole followed. The ground was hard and uneven under his boots. The darkness was the particular darkness of mountains without artificial light. Not absolute, but deep enough that the first 30 seconds required his eyes to make the adjustment that no amount of preparation fully prepared you for. He heard the team assembling around him, the quiet sounds of gear settling, weapons being brought to ready positions, breathing being deliberately controlled. Elena raised her fist. The team froze. She held the position for 6 full seconds, which was long enough to mean something. Then she lowered her hand and pointed left. They moved. The first checkpoint was 4 kilometers from the insertion point through terrain that rewarded patience and punished speed. Cole settled into the rhythm of it, the particular internal cadence that field operators develop through thousands of hours of movement, under load in difficult conditions, the ability to sustain a pace that was faster than a civilian sprint while consuming a fraction of the energy and making a fraction of the noise. Elena set the pace. It was fast. Not reckless fast, not proving something fast, just operationally fast, the pace of someone who had calculated exactly how much time they had and exactly how much distance they needed to cover and had set the tempo accordingly. And if that tempo was harder than what some of the team expected, then the expectation needed to adjust, not the pace. Cole matched it without difficulty. He was strong and experienced, and his body did what his body was trained to do. But he noticed for the first time that he was not the strongest presence in the movement. The person setting the pace, the small, compact woman in the faded tactical jacket, moved through the darkness with an economy of motion that Cole, in 20 years of watching how people moved under operational conditions, had rarely seen in anyone. She didn't fight the terrain. She read it 3 steps ahead and moved through it the way water moved through rock, not by force but by finding exactly the right path and committing to it completely. 42 minutes into the movement, Lance Corporal Derek Bowman Torch caught his boot on a root system that wasn't visible in the darkness and went down hard on his left knee. The sound was small, suppressed by training and by the soft soil, but it was enough. Elena stopped. The team stopped. She moved back through the formation with the same unhurried efficiency she applied to everything crouching beside Torch without making it dramatic. "Talk to me," she said, voice barely above a breath. "I'm good," Torch said. His voice was tight in a way that meant he wasn't. "Scale it. A beat. 6. Wait on it." Torch shifted, pressed down. His jaw tightened. "Functional." Elena looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Not longer. 2 seconds was enough for someone who knew what they were looking at. "You stay functional," she said. "You tell me immediately if that changes. Not when it becomes a problem. Before." "Yes, ma'am." She was already moving forward before the last syllable finished. Cole fell back into position behind her and found himself doing something he almost never did during operations. He was watching her instead of watching his sector. He corrected it immediately, a movement of his eyes back to where they belonged, because watching the wrong thing in the wrong environment got people killed. And he knew that, but the observation had already registered. The way she had handled Torch, the 2 seconds of assessment, the instruction that was not a question and not a threat, but simply a clear statement of expectation that left no room for misinterpretation. No drama, no performance of authority, just the clean, direct language of someone who needed things to work and knew exactly how to communicate that. Cole had served under 4 different commanding officers across his career. 2 of them had been good. 1 had been exceptional. None of them had communicated quite like that. He filed it away and kept moving. The checkpoint appeared out of the darkness at the 63-minute mark, a natural feature in the terrain that the map had indicated, and that Elena confirmed with a single hand signal before the team folded in around it for the brief tactical pause that the plan called for. Cole moved up towards the front of the formation. This was the point where the route changed, where the relatively accessible terrain they had been moving through gave way to the more exposed approach that would take them toward the facility's last known position. He wanted to see the ground-level confirmation of what the maps had shown. Elena was already on one knee reading a small tactical display that she shielded from ambient light with practiced ease. Master Chief Caldwell was beside her, and the 2 of them were doing the thing that experienced operators did at checkpoints, not talking through everything, because everything didn't need to be talked through, just confirming the specific pieces of information that the next phase of the operation required to be exactly right. Cole positioned himself close enough to listen. "Satellite pass showed movement at this grid," Caldwell said, quietly indicating a point on the display. 30 minutes before we inserted. Direction of west to east, consistent with patrol pattern. Lena studied the display. Interval estimated 40 minutes based on 2 observed cycles. "That gives us a window starting in," she checked the time, 11 minutes. "We need to be through the exposure zone in 8. Caldwell nodded. "Tight." "Tight is fine," Elena said. "Tight we can work with." She looked up. "What we cannot work with is the patrol completing a cycle while we're in the open, so we move at the window and we move fast. Any questions about that?" Caldwell shook his head. Elena looked past him and found Cole standing there. She held his gaze for a brief moment. Not hostile, not warm, just direct. "Harrington, your team takes the right flank through the exposure zone. You set the pace on that side. Keep it matched to the center." "Understood," Cole said. "If you see anything that isn't on the satellite imagery, you signal before you act, not after." "Yes, ma'am." She held his gaze for one more beat. Then she looked away. Cole returned to his position and gathered his small sub-element Torch and 2 Rangers who had been attached to his flank. He explained the task in 6 words and a hand gesture. They confirmed with nods. They waited. The 11 minutes felt like 4. Elena gave the signal. They moved through the exposure zone. 8 minutes of movement that Cole's body would remember long after his mind had processed and filed the tactical details. The specific sensation of crossing open ground in darkness with potential hostile observation from 3 directions, and the knowledge that the window was measured not in minutes, but in the estimated behavioral pattern of an enemy force, whose precision could not be confirmed. That particular combination of factors produced a heightened state of awareness that was, Cole had always thought, one of the most honest experiences available to a human nervous system. You found out exactly who you were in those 8 minutes. He moved fast. He moved clean. His sub-element matched him without needing to be told to. They reached the far side of the exposure zone with 43 seconds to spare. The team folded back together. Elena did a silent count, confirmed all personnel. "Move forward. No acknowledgement of the fact that they had just completed something that required precision and composure. No congratulation. No pause for collective relief, because the hard part was still ahead. 2 kilometers further into the mountains, the terrain changed in a way that the maps had suggested, but that maps always failed to fully communicate. The maps showed elevation and contour, but they didn't show the specific quality of the rock underfoot, or the way the wind moved through certain passages with enough force to push an unbraced person sideways, or the particular exhausting unpredictability of ground that looked stable and wasn't. This was where Torch's knee became relevant again. Cole heard it before he saw it, the very slight change in the rhythm of Torch's movement, the extra half second on each left side plant. That meant the knee was talking louder now. He moved back through the formation quietly. "How bad?" he said directly into Torch's ear. "I said I'm functional." "I heard what you said. How bad?" A pause that was too long. 7. "Tell her." "I'm not telling her." Cole put his hand on Torch's shoulder. Not hard, but firm enough to stop his forward movement for exactly 1 step. "Listen to me. She told you to tell her before it becomes a problem." "It's becoming a problem. You tell her now or I tell her now. And those 2 options produce very different outcomes for your career, you understand me?" Torch's jaw moved. Pride and sense fighting each other in real time. Sense won. "Fine," he said. Cole moved him toward Elena. The exchange took 45 seconds. Elena listened, assessed, made a decision without visibly deliberating. "You move to the center of the formation," she told Torch. "Reduce load, give the secondary pack to Rigordan. You keep moving. If it hits 8, you tell me immediately and we adjust." Torch nodded. "You're still on this mission," she said, and there was something in her voice that was not reassurance exactly, but was in the same territory. A simple statement of fact that happened to be exactly what the person in front of her needed to hear. "Don't let the knee make decisions for you." "That's my job." Torch almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She was already moving. Cole fell in beside her for exactly 3 steps long enough to speak quietly. "Thank you." She didn't look at him. "Don't thank me. Keep your flank clean." He dropped back to his position. The second hour of movement was harder than the first, the way the second hour always was. The initial adrenaline had metabolized, the body was running on genuine reserves now, and the darkness and cold and terrain were extracting a specific toll from every person in the formation that no amount of conditioning fully eliminated, only managed. Cole managed it. He watched Elena manage it without any visible sign that it required management. That was when the first radio contact came through. Not from command, not from the extraction team standing by at a distance. From the facility, scratchy, intermittent, barely coherent, but unmistakably human. Elena stopped the formation with a fist and put her hand to her earpiece. The voice in the signal was male. Controlled but barely. The specific controlled quality of someone who had been holding it together for a very long time and had a limited amount of holding left available. "IRONVEIL, this is Dr. Raymond Hess, research team. We have 6 personnel, Mobile 5 with injuries. We are in the lower level. May I repeat, lower level? There are static, at least 12 static. They changed the schedule. The signal cut." Elena looked at Caldwell. Caldwell's face had shifted into the particular stillness that experienced operators adopted when information required immediate processing and emotional response was a luxury that the next decision did not have time for. "They changed the schedule," Cole said. "I heard it," Elena said. "That means the patrol pattern is not what the satellite showed us." She was already moving. "Adjusted interval. Could be shorter. Could mean they know we're here or could mean routine variation." She looked at the team. "Either way, we move faster." Reardon knew pace. Hound moved to the front. The pace became something that Cole would not have described as comfortable under any circumstances. He matched it. Torch matched it. Everyone matched it. Because the voice on the radio had been the voice of a real person in a real place who had told them something changed, and changed meant the window was possibly smaller than planned, and smaller than planned in this context was the kind of information that converted into pure forward motion without requiring any additional processing. They reached the facility perimeter at the 2-hour and 14-minute mark. Cole had expected a pause, a tactical assessment, a collective breath. What he got instead was Elena going completely still for approximately 4 seconds in almost meditative stillness that he had not seen before, and that struck him in the moment as the most focused thing he had ever watched a person do, and then moving directly toward the facility's lower entry point with a confidence that was not reckless, but was absolute. "She knows something," Hound said quietly at Cole's shoulder. "What?" "About the layout, about the entry. She's been here before, or she's been somewhere exactly like it." Hound paused. "Or she's reading something we're not seeing." Cole watched her move. He thought about a kitchen. He thought about 14 hours. He thought about 6 team members alive because one person had looked at the worst possible situation and found a way through it using only what was available. And then he stopped thinking and started moving because that was what the moment required, and because the woman in front of him had just reached the entry point and was making a hand signal that meant they had approximately 40 seconds before the window closed. And every second he spent thinking about the past was a second not spent on the present. He moved up, took his position. Ready? 40 seconds. The entry team stacked behind Elena. She looked back once. The gray eyes moved across each face, not checking for fear, not looking for reassurance, just confirming that everyone was where they needed to be. Cole held her gaze for the half second that it landed on him, and he gave her the nod that meant ready. She turned back to the door. 3 seconds later, Operation IRONVEIL entered its most dangerous phase. And Cole Harrington, Force Recon Marine, 7 years of service, 4 deployments, a scar on his temple, and a call sign earned on a rooftop on a continent he wasn't allowed to name, went in behind her. Not leading, following. And for the first time in his career, following felt like exactly the right place to be. The door gave way in silence. Elena had not forced it. She had done something with her hand against the frame, a specific practice pressure applied to a specific point, and the mechanism had released the way a thing releases when someone understands its exact weakness. Cole filed that away without comment and moved through the entry behind her weapon, up-breathing controlled every trained instinct he possessed, now running at full operational capacity. The lower level was dark in the way that only underground spaces are dark. Not the darkness of night, which always had some ambient quality to it, some faint reference to a sky somewhere above, but the absolute darkness of enclosed space where light had never been invited and had no intention of arriving on its own. Every member of the team was running night vision, which converted the world into the familiar green-gray landscape of amplified available light. And in that landscape, Cole could see the geometry of the space around them. Low-ceiling concrete walls, a corridor that ran straight ahead and then divided. Elena moved to the left fork without hesitation. Cole caught Hound's eye behind his night optic. Hound gave the smallest possible shrug. "She knows." They followed. 40 meters in the corridor turned, and that was when the first contact happened. It wasn't dramatic in the way that civilian imagination made contact dramatic. There was no warning shout, no dramatic standoff, no moment of mutual recognition. There was simply a figure at the end of the corridor who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Elena dealt with it in approximately 3 seconds, with a controlled efficiency that Cole had only seen a handful of times in his career, and the figure went down without a sound, and she was already moving before the echo of the motion had finished registering in Cole's nervous system. Torch, moving behind Cole, exhaled once through his nose. Not surprise, acknowledgement. Yeah, Cole thought. That. The radio on Elena's kit crackled at the 11-minute mark, a faint compressed signal from the team's communications specialist who had remained at the outer perimeter with the 2 Rangers monitoring the patrol patterns that had changed from what the satellite had shown. "Whitmore, patrol has accelerated. You have reduced window. Estimate contact with your position in 19 minutes if current pace holds." Elena pressed her transmit button twice. Received, understood. No words needed. She turned to Caldwell and held up 2 fingers, then pointed down. 2 floors down, they needed to go deeper. Caldwell's face didn't move. He simply turned and signaled the team. Cole did the math without being asked. 19 minutes, 2 floors, 11 people to locate, confirm, and move. Some of those 11 injured according to the radio contact. An extraction route that assumed a patrol pattern that was no longer accurate. He had been in complicated situations before. He had not been in this specific combination of complicated before. Harrington, Elena's voice in his earpiece, barely above breath level. When we find them, you're managing the mobility assessment. Who can move fast? Who needs support? Who needs to be carried? I need that information in under 60 seconds. Understood? Don't give me a medical evaluation. Give me a movement evaluation. There's a difference. Yes, ma'am. She was already moving down the stairwell. The second floor down was where the architecture changed from functional corridor to something that had been modified, reinforced the kind of structural modification that spoke to long-term planning and deliberate concealment. Cole registered this and kept moving because registering and acting on were two different things, and the acting on right now was simply to follow Elena through the dark at a pace that left no room for secondary thoughts. At the 14-minute mark, they found them. Dr. Raymond Hess was not what Cole expected from the voice on the radio. He was perhaps 55 slight, wearing clothing that had been through conditions it was not designed for. His eyes, when the team's filtered light reached them, were the eyes of someone who had been running on adrenaline and terror for 62 hours and was only now allowing himself to process the fact that help had arrived. He grabbed Elena's arm. "There are more of them than we thought," he said. Not panicked, past panicked, into the flat territory that comes after panic has exhausted itself and left only information. The lower corridor has been occupied for at least 36 hours. We counted 16 at the last visual. Elena looked at him. "Where are your people?" "Through here, but the room," he stopped. "There's someone in the room next to them. Not one of ours." Cole felt the team tighten around that sentence. Elena said, "Hostile." "I don't know. She's been there since last night. She hasn't made noise, but she's been listening. I could hear her breathing through the wall." Elena processed this in approximately 2 seconds. Then she looked at Caldwell and said, "With me." She looked at Cole. "Hold here with the team. Nothing moves until I signal." Cole's instinct, the 7-year for-deployment instinct that had kept him alive and that he trusted with his life on a daily basis, pushed back against that immediately. Letting the commanding officer move toward an unknown into a confined space without adequate cover was the kind of decision that looked wrong from every tactical angle he knew how to read. He said, "Captain, I should hold here, Staff Sergeant." Not loud, not harsh, just absolute. The kind of absolute that had no space in it for negotiation or compromise. "Signal." She moved. Cole held. It was the hardest 17 seconds of the operation. He counted them. 1, 2, 3. He kept his weapon oriented toward the corridor behind them, where the patrol was somewhere in the building, moving on a new schedule that nobody had anticipated. 4, 5, 6. Torch was beside him, breathing controlled knee, apparently holding at a level that was functional if not comfortable. 7, 8, 9. Somewhere in the dark ahead, Elena Whitmore and Master Chief Caldwell were moving toward a room that contained an unknown friendly hostile or something else entirely that the binary of friendly and hostile failed to adequately capture. 10, 11, 12. A sound from ahead, not a weapon, not a struggle. A voice Elena's at a pitch and cadence that Cole could not fully resolve into words, but that his nervous system classified immediately as controlled contact rather than confrontation. 13, 14, 15, Elena's voice in his earpiece. "Bring the team forward, easy." They moved. What Cole found in the room took him a moment to process. The 11 research team members were alive. This was the first fact and the most important one, and he held it while the rest of the information assembled itself around it. 6 mobile, as the radio had said, 3 with injuries significant enough to affect movement speed, 2 who were going to need direct physical support to move at all. Cole moved through the assessment with the speed and efficiency that Elena had asked for, not medical evaluation, movement evaluation. He used his hands and his eyes and 30 seconds of direct, practical communication with each person and assembled the picture in his head with the precision of someone who had done mass casualty assessments in the field and understood that the goal was not thoroughness, it was accuracy under time pressure. 54 seconds. 6 walk unassisted, he told Elena quietly. 3 walk assisted, 2 need carry. I'd put the carries on Thompson and Valdez. They're the strongest on the team, and we need Riordan managing the rear. Elena was already looking at Hess. "The woman in the next room. Who is she?" Hess rubbed his face with both hands. "She said her name is Mara. She said she's been trapped here for 4 days. She said," he stopped, reconsidered. She said she knows a route out that isn't on any map we have. Elena looked at the wall between the rooms as if she could read through it. Is she trustworthy? Cole asked Hess. Hess looked at him with the eyes of a man who had spent 62 hours in a room where trustworthy was a concept that had become very complicated. I don't know, he said, but she knew the patrol schedule, the real one, the one that changed. Elena was already at the connecting door. She opened it. The woman inside was perhaps 40, calm in the way that people are calm when the alternative has stopped being available to them as an option. She looked at Elena and did not look at the weapon in Cole's hands and did not look at the assembled team behind them and said simply, "You're later than I expected." The satellite imagery was outdated, Elena said. The woman Mara almost smiled. It always is here. She stood up. I know how you came in. That route is going to be closed in approximately 8 minutes. The patrol rotates coverage to the eastern entry when the secondary team activates. She paused. There's another way out. Elena held eye contact with her for a beat that lasted long enough to communicate several things without words. Then she said, show me. Mara moved to the wall. She pressed her palm against a specific section of it in a way that was eerily reminiscent of what Elena had done to the entry door 40 minutes ago. Specific pressure at a specific point and something shifted. A section of the wall that had appeared solid was not solid. Behind it was a passage that smelled of age and disuse and the particular cold that comes from moving air in an enclosed underground space. Cole stared at it. 4 days, he said to Mara. You've been in here 4 days and you didn't use this. She looked at him with an expression that was not quite patience and not quite pity, but occupied the same neighborhood as both. I used it to find them, she said, gesturing toward Hest and his team. Then I waited, because going out alone wasn't the plan. Cole looked at Elena. Elena's expression had shifted almost imperceptibly in a way that Cole was only now beginning to be able to read a slight adjustment around the eyes that indicated the kind of rapid multivariable calculation that most people experienced as intuition, but was actually the product of pattern recognition at a speed that conscious thought couldn't match. How long is the passage? Elena asked. 400 meters. It exits on the north face above the tree line. Above the tree line puts us in the exposure zone on the way out, for about 60 meters. After that, the ridge line provides cover. Mara paused. And the patrol doesn't go above the tree line. They consider it unnavigable. Elena looked at Cole. Cole looked at the 2 team members who were going to need to be carried. 400 meters of passage, 2 people being carried, 3 people with injuries that reduced their speed, 11 research team members who had been in confined conditions for 62 hours and whose physical reserves were unknown, plus a team that had already been moving through mountain terrain for over 2 hours. Patrol is 8 minutes from activating secondary coverage, he said. That closes the eastern entry, which we're not using, Elena said. Right, but secondary activation usually means increased internal sweep. Yes. She had already done this calculation. She had probably done it the moment Mara mentioned the secondary team. We have 6 minutes before internal sweep becomes a risk. We need to be in the passage before that. Can we move everyone through in 6 minutes? Elena looked at the room, at the people in it, at Mara standing beside the open passage with the patience of someone who had been waiting 4 days for this specific moment and was not going to waste it by rushing the wrong things. We're not going to move everyone in 6 minutes, Elena said. We're going to start moving everyone right now, and the 6 minutes is going to become whatever it becomes, and we're going to deal with each problem when it arrives. Cole opened his mouth. Elena looked at him. He closed it. Move, she said. They moved. The next 11 minutes were the most tactically complex 11 minutes that Cole had experienced in 7 years of extraordinary service. And what made them extraordinary was not the individual components carrying people through confined spaces, managing injured personnel, maintaining noise discipline, while coordinating movement across a team that had tripled in size from what had been planned, but the way those components collided with each other in real time in ways that no plan survived contact with. At the 3-minute mark, one of the carried personnel, a researcher named Garcia, who had a shoulder injury that made her dead weight on the left side, began to lose consciousness. Not from blood loss, from the combination of exhaustion and confined space anxiety that her body had apparently been managing on pure willpower for 62 hours, and had now decided it was safe to stop managing. Cole caught her before she went fully down and kept her moving through sheer physical commitment, one arm under her shoulders, redistributing his own load in a way that his shoulder would register for the next 3 days. But that kept forward momentum from stopping. "I've got her," he said. "I know," Elena said from ahead in the passage without looking back. "Keep pace." At the 6-minute mark, the internal sweep activated. Cole knew because the passage carried sound in a way that open terrain didn't, and what came through the wall at the 6-minute mark was the particular acoustic signature of a coordinated movement. Multiple footsteps, multiple voices at low volume, the systematic pattern of people checking rooms in sequence. The team went completely silent without being told to. 45 seconds of absolute stillness in the dark. Cole held Garcia's weight and did not breathe above the minimum. The sound moved through the wall and past them and diminished. Elena's hand signal came out of the dark ahead. "Move." They moved. At the 9-minute mark, Torch's knee finally crossed from functional into non-functional. Cole heard it, the change in his teammates' gait, the involuntary half-second hesitation on the left side that had been building since the checkpoint, and had now reached the point where the body was making the decision rather than the person. "I was beside Torch in 2 steps. "Don't," Torch said. His voice was tight but controlled. "I'm not asking," Cole said. He repositioned himself to take Torch's weight on the right side, which shifted his own load but didn't stop it. "Move." Torch moved. At the 11-minute mark, they hit the first complication in Mara's route. A section of the passage that she had navigated 4 days ago was no longer navigable in the same way a structural shift. Maybe water infiltration, maybe simple age choosing this specific week to make itself known. A section of the floor had given way, leaving a gap that was approximately 2 meters across and whose depth was not immediately determinable in the available light. The team stopped. Mara stared at it. For the first time since Cole had met her, she looked uncertain. Elena crouched at the edge of the gap and ran her hand along the wall to the right, then the left. Then she looked up. "There's a conduit above us," she said. Not a question. Cole looked up. There was. Load-bearing iron. It held whatever ran through it for however long this passage has existed. She stood up. "It'll hold a person for the time it takes to cross." Cole looked at the conduit, looked at the gap, did the calculation. "You're talking about crossing hand over hand at above a gap we can't see the bottom of, with a team that includes 2 non-ambulatory personnel and 3 injuries." "Yes," Elena said. "That's what I'm talking about." She looked at him directly. "You have a better option. Staff Sergeant, now is the moment." A beat. "No, ma'am." Then let's solve the problem we have." What followed was 15 minutes of improvised engineering that Cole would later describe to his unit as the most creative use of available equipment he had ever witnessed in a field context. Elena did not have the luxury of the right tools. She had what the team was carrying and what the passage had made available in terms of fixed points and structural features, and she built a crossing system from those components with the focused practicality of someone who had 2 years earlier held a team together in a kitchen for 14 hours using improvised tools. She worked fast. She worked without wasted motion. And when Cole watched her hands moving through the construction of the crossing system, he thought of something Hound had said on the aircraft. She took the worst possible situation and found a way. The kitchen was the battlefield. I understood now for the first time what the call sign actually meant. Not a joke, not a dismissal, not a coincidence. A true thing precisely named. Because what made Elena Whitmore dangerous in the field was not the skills that training gave everyone, the marksmanship, the tactical awareness, the physical capacity. Those things she had, but what the kitchen had revealed, what the passage was now confirming, was something else entirely. She could build something from nothing. She could solve a problem that had no solution using only the components of the problem itself. That was not a common skill. That was possibly the rarest skill in this profession. And the call sign wore it honestly. Garcia crossed first, supported by Cole. Then the second non-ambulatory researcher, a man named Park, whose leg made movement impossible, but whose upper body strength was fully intact and who crossed the conduit with a grimness that Cole found genuinely impressive. Then the 3 injured but mobile researchers. Then Torch, who crossed one-handed because his left side wasn't reliable, and who did it with a jaw set so hard it was almost audible. Mara crossed second to last with the ease of someone who had made this specific kind of physical demand of herself regularly enough that the gap in the conduit in the darkness were simply conditions, not obstacles. Elena crossed last. She did not look down. She did not hesitate. She crossed with the same economy of motion she applied to everything, committed precise and completely without drama. When her feet touched the far side of the gap, she did a silent head count. All personnel. She held up her fist for 3 seconds, which meant everyone stops and everyone breathes. Cole used those 3 seconds to let his arms recover from the load they had been carrying. He could feel Garcia's weight still in his shoulder. He could feel the cumulative toll of the movement and the passage and the 11 minutes that had taken significantly more than 11 minutes. He could feel Torch beside him doing the same kind of unconscious physical accounting. Then Elena lowered her fist and pointed forward. The exit appeared at the 390-meter mark, not the 400 that Mara had estimated, which turned out to matter more than Cole would have expected, because the 60 meters of exposure on the north face above the tree line began immediately at the exit, and every meter the team could spend in the passage rather than in the open was a meter that reduced the risk profile of the extraction. The cold hit them again at the exit, that same immediate absolute cold of high mountain November air that had met them when they inserted what felt like a long time ago, but was actually cold checked 2 hours and 53 minutes. Elena paused at the exit. Cole moved up beside her. 60 meters, she said quietly. Mara said the patrol doesn't go above the tree line. Mara has been underground for 4 days. Information degrades. Cole scanned the north face with his optic. I'm not seeing movement. Neither am I. She looked at the team behind her, at the research personnel who were at the end of their physical reserves, at Torch, who was standing on 1.5 legs and refusing to acknowledge it, at Caldwell, whose expression said move when you're ready and not a second before, at Garcia, who had recovered consciousness and was standing on her own now, with the careful dignity of someone who was deeply embarrassed about the alternative, at Mara, who was watching Elena with the same focused patience she had applied to everything. Elena exhaled once. We go in 2 groups, she said. First group takes the injured and the carries, moves to the ridgeline and sets security. Second group follows with the remainder. She looked at Cole. You lead the first group. Cole felt something move in his chest, not pride, older than pride, the specific sensation of being trusted by someone whose trust you have not yet earned and know it. Yes, ma'am. Fast as your slowest person can manage, she said. Not faster. Don't leave anyone behind the pace of the group. Understood. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Go. Cole turned to the first group and they went. The 60 meters is 43 seconds of concentrated exposure, with 2 people being carried and 3 others moving at reduced pace on the broken, uneven ground above the tree line in the dark. Cole set the pace at the maximum that the slowest person in the group could sustain and held it there with the discipline of someone who understood that the instinct to go faster was exactly the wrong instinct, when the constraint was the group and not the individual. They reached the ridgeline. Cole turned. Elena's group was already moving. He watched them cross. He counted. Every person. The second to last person across the exposure zone was Mara. The last person was Elena. She moved the way she had moved through everything that night, with that absolute commitment of someone who had already made every decision that needed making and was now simply executing without hesitation, without unnecessary drama, without any reference to the possibility that it might not work. Her feet hit the ridgeline. Cole released a breath he had been holding for 43 seconds. Elena looked at him. At the team, did her silent count? 22 personnel plus Mara, all present. Then she did something Cole had not seen her do since the chow hall at Raven Ridge, 4 hours and an entire education ago. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Not relief, not satisfaction, not the performance of either. Just 3 seconds of something private that she allowed herself and then closed. When she opened them, she was already looking at the extraction route. 7 kilometers to pickup, she said. We move identical. And the team moved. Cole moved with them. Garcia's weight redistributed now across 2 people. Torch's arm over his shoulder as a supplement to his compromised knee, the dark mountain terrain ahead of them, navigable and cold and real. He thought about a chow hall. I thought about a helmet on a floor. He thought about a laugh that had traveled across a room and landed on a woman who had not flinched. He thought about the way 400 people had stood up. He understood now. He had not understood it before, not in the chow hall, not on the aircraft, not even in the passage when he watched her build something from nothing above a gap in the dark. Understanding had been assembling itself piece by piece from the moment Elena Whitmore had walked past him in the dining facility without looking back, and it had finally on the north face of a mountain above the tree line at 3 hours and 12 minutes into an operation that should not have been possible finished assembling. The call sign was not a joke. It had never been a joke. It was the truest thing about her. And Cole Harrington, who had built his career on knowing what strength looked like, kept moving through the dark behind a woman who had just shown him that he had been looking at the wrong things. The ridgeline fell away behind them. The mountain carried them forward. And somewhere ahead, the lights of the extraction point were waiting. The 7 kilometers to the extraction point took 1 hour and 41 minutes. Cole knew this because he counted. Not deliberately, his mind had not made a conscious decision to track the time. But somewhere in the machinery of a nervous system that had been running at operational intensity for going on 4 hours, the counting happened automatically, the way breathing happened, the way the weight of Garcia's redistributed load registered in his shoulder without him deciding to register it. 1 hour and 41 minutes of movement through mountain terrain in the dark, with 22 people, 3 of whom could not walk unassisted, 2 of whom were being carried in rotation by team members who were themselves running on the final reserves of a very long night. Nobody complained. That was the thing Cole kept coming back to during the movement, the thing that his mind returned to in the spaces between immediate tactical demands. 22 people, including 11 researchers who had been in confined conditions for 62 hours, who had every physical and psychological justification for complaint, and not one of them said a single word that wasn't operationally necessary. He looked at the front of the formation. Elena was setting the pace. He understood. The extraction aircraft was a modified transport that Cole recognized by sound before he could see it, the specific acoustic signature of rotors in mountain air, a sound that his body had learned to associate with the end of something dangerous, with the transition from field reality back to the world where decisions had time to breathe. It came in low and fast the way extraction aircraft always came in when the mission parameters included the possibility of hostile observation. And it touched down in a clearing that was exactly where the plan said it would be, which was the first thing in the last 4 hours that had gone exactly according to plan. Cole helped Garcia aboard first, then Park. Then the 3 injured but mobile researchers, each of whom made the step up into the aircraft with the specific determination of people who have decided that they will not be carried onto the aircraft regardless of what their bodies are saying. Torch went aboard under his own power, which required Cole to resist the instinct to assist because Torch had made it very clear during the last kilometer of movement that assistance at the aircraft ramp was a line he was not willing to cross, and Cole respected that line the way he respected all lines drawn by people who understood exactly what they were drawing. Elena was the last one aboard, same as she had been last out of the passage, same as she had been last across the exposure zone. Cole watched her step up and do her final count from the top of the ramp before signaling the crew chief. All personnel, all present. The ramp closed, the aircraft lifted, and the particular silence that fell over the interior of a transport aircraft immediately after a successful extraction, that specific, exhausted, grateful quiet that had no civilian equivalent settled over everyone like a physical thing. Cole leaned his head back against the aircraft's interior wall and closed his eyes. He lasted approximately 45 seconds before he opened them again. He looked across the aircraft at Elena. She was writing something in a small notebook that she held braced against her knee, writing with the focused efficiency she applied to everything. And Cole realized she was constructing the initial mission report while the details were still fresh, the way experienced operators did when they understood that memory under operational stress was unreliable, and that accuracy mattered more than the physical need to rest. He watched her for a moment, then he looked away. Dr. Raymond Hess was sitting 2 seats down from Cole, and the expression on the man's face had shifted completely from what it had been in the lower level of the facility. The flat information-only expression of someone past panic had now given way to something more complicated. He looked like a man who was processing the gap between what he had expected the next 62 hours to look like and what had actually happened. He caught Cole's gaze. "She's been doing this for how long?" Hess asked. Cole considered the question. Longer than you'd think from looking at her. Hess nodded slowly. In the passage, when she built the crossing. He paused. I've worked with military personnel on 3 different research assignments. I've never seen anyone think that fast in that kind of situation. Cole said nothing. The call sign, Hess said. I heard it when they came in. Dishes. He glanced toward Elena. There's a story. There is, Cole said. Will you tell me? Cole thought about a kitchen, about 14 hours, about 6 team members alive on the other side of an impossible situation because one person had refused to accept the word impossible as a final answer. Ask her, Cole said, when this is over. If she wants you to know, she'll tell you. Hess looked at Elena. Elena was still writing in her notebook, not looking up, apparently entirely unaware of or entirely uninterested in the conversation happening 6 feet away from her. She won't, Hess said. No, Cole agreed. Probably not. The aircraft banked. Cole felt the change in orientation that meant they had cleared the mountain terrain and were now in the lower altitude approach that led back toward Raven Ridge. And some part of his body, the part that had been holding itself at operational readiness for going on 5 hours, registered this change and began the slow, cautious process of standing down. He hurt in 7 specific places. I was aware of all of them now in a way he hadn't been during the operation, because pain was useful information during an operation and distracting information afterward, and his nervous system had apparently decided that afterward had arrived. His shoulder, where Garcia's weight had redistributed for 3 kilometers. His left knee, which had taken the full load coming down the stairwell in the facility when he had been managing 2 other people's movement simultaneously. 3 of his fingers on the right hand from the conduit crossing above the gap. The back of his neck from the sustained tension of sustained attention over sustained hours. And the specific familiar ache behind his sternum that he recognized as the aftermath of sustained adrenaline. Not physical injury, just the body's honest accounting of what it had been asked to produce. He did his own quiet inventory and concluded that all 7 were functional damage rather than structural, which meant that in 24 hours, most of it would be down to 3, and in 48 it would be 1, and in a week it would be the particular residual tenderness that his body had learned to carry the way a building learns to carry the record of previous weather. Mara was sitting in the forward section of the aircraft with Caldwell, and the 2 of them were talking in the low, focused way of people exchanging information that was operationally relevant rather than socially driven. Cole watched them for a moment and noted the ease of the exchange, the way Mara's body language had shifted from the compressed patience of someone who had been waiting in an enclosed space for 4 days to something more open, more present, like a person returning to a version of themselves that the circumstances had temporarily displaced. He filed her away as a question to be answered later. Who was she? Why had she been in that location? Why had she known the patrol schedule, the real one, when the satellite imagery hadn't caught it? She had known they were coming. She had been waiting for them specifically. The passage had already been identified before the team arrived. Cole added those pieces to each other quietly and arrived at a conclusion that he kept to himself for now because the aircraft was the wrong place for that conversation. And because Elena, who was still writing in her notebook, had almost certainly already arrived at the same conclusion and would address it through the appropriate channels in the appropriate sequence. At the 40-minute mark of the flight, Torch appeared in the seat beside Cole. He moved with the careful management of someone who was treating his left knee as a fragile and untrustworthy piece of equipment, which it currently was, and he sat with the leg extended and his jaw set in the particular way it set when Torch was refusing to acknowledge something painful. How bad? Cole asked. Manageable. That's not what I asked. Torch looked at him. I finished the mission. Yes, Cole said, you did. A beat passed between them that was not uncomfortable. She told me to keep moving, Torch said. In the facility, when the knee went, she said, don't let it make decisions for you. He paused. I've had 4 differents who tell me to push through pain. None of them said it like that. Cole considered this. What's the difference? Torch thought about it for a moment in the honest way that young people think about things when they're too tired to perform the answer. The others were telling me what they needed from me, he said. She was telling me what I needed from myself. Cole sat with that. The aircraft started its descent. Raven Ridge appeared below them in the way military installations appeared from the air at night, a specific configuration of lights in dark space that told you everything about function and nothing about comfort, a pattern that Cole had seen from above perhaps 200 times in his career, and that his brain now decoded automatically as home, the way it had learned to decode the particular sound of extraction rotors as safe. Wheels down at 0347. The ramp opened. The cold was the same cold it always was at Raven Ridge in November, immediate, unapologetic waiting for you. Cole stepped off the aircraft and felt it, and it felt different from the cold on the north face above the tree line, because that cold had been the cold of exposure, and this cold was the cold of return, and his body understood the difference even when his mind was too tired to articulate it. The medical team was waiting. They always were at extraction, and the research team personnel moved toward them with a collective relief that was quiet and profound, the specific relief of people who had been held together by necessity for 62 hours and could now afford to let go of that particular grip. Garcia let them take her on a stretcher without the resistance she had shown at the aircraft ramp, because she was back in a place where being helped did not mean being left behind, and that distinction mattered to her in ways that Cole recognized from his own experience of the same distinction. Park was already talking to a medical officer with the focused intensity of someone who needed to describe their injuries accurately before exhaustion made accurate description impossible. Hess stood at the edge of the activity for a moment, looking around at Raven Ridge with the expression of a man who had not expected to see it again and was having some difficulty calibrating to the reality that he had. Then he did something that Cole did not expect. He walked toward Elena. Elena was standing near the aircraft, speaking quietly with Caldwell notebook closed now, the operational summary presumably complete, or as complete as it could be at this hour. She looked up as Hess approached and waited. He stopped in front of her. I was a 55-year-old scientist who had spent 62 hours in circumstances that most people would not survive intact. And he was standing in front of a woman who had come through the dark to find him, and the expression on his face was trying to do something that expression alone was inadequate for. He said, Captain Whitmore, I don't have the right words. Elena looked at him. You don't need them. My team is safe, she said. That's the only word that matters right now. Hess nodded. Something in his jaw moved. I looked at that call sign when you came in. He said, I didn't understand it. Most people don't. I think I do now. He held her gaze. I watched you build that crossing in the dark. I watched you find the way out when our way was closed. I watched you. He stopped, composed himself. You took the worst thing and made it workable. Elena said nothing. That's not a small thing, Hess said. No, Elena agreed. It isn't. And then in the quiet matter-of-fact tone of someone who had long since stopped needing external confirmation of things she already knew to be true. Go get checked out, doctor. Your team needs to see you do that. Hess almost smiled. He walked away. Cole had been standing near enough to hear all of it and was now aware that Elena knew he had heard it, because nothing within 15 feet of Elena Whitmore escaped her attention, and she turned and looked at him with the direct, unhurried gaze that he had come to understand was simply how she looked at things fully, without evasion, without the performed casualness that most people used to make eye contact feel less significant than it was. Get your team checked out, she said. Yes, ma'am, he paused, one beat. For what it's worth. Later, Staff Sergeant. Not dismissive, just accurate. There's a process, medical first, debrief second. Whatever you want to say, it keeps. Cole nodded. She turned back to Caldwell. Cole gathered Torch and the two Rangers from his sub-element and moved them toward the medical station with the purposeful efficiency of someone who had a clear next task and was performing it even as the part of his mind that wasn't occupied with immediate function kept returning to the aircraft, to the operation, to the passage, to the 60 meters of exposure on the north face, to the crossing above the gap, to a woman who had looked at a problem with no solution and built the solution from the problem's own components. The medical station was bright in a way that felt aggressive after hours in the dark. Cole squinted through it and submitted to the assessment process with the patient compliance of someone who had done this enough times to know that resistance was inefficient. The shoulder was strained, not torn. The knee would need imaging in the morning. The fingers were bruised, not broken. The medic wrote things down and gave Cole a set of instructions that Cole memorized and would partially follow. Torch's knee was more serious. The medic said ligament involvement with the specific expression medical personnel adopt when they are being accurate rather than reassuring. And Torch's jaw set again in the way it set when Torch was processing information he didn't want. Am I off rotation? Torch asked. That is above my pay grade, the medic said. But you're in a boot for at least 2 weeks minimum. Torch looked at the ceiling. Cole put his hand on his teammate's shoulder briefly. Not long, not dramatic, just the kind of contact that communicates something that language in the aftermath of a hard thing sometimes can't quite reach. You finished, Cole said. Torch looked at him. Knee and all, Cole said. You finished. That's permanent. The boot is temporary. Torch's jaw moved. He nodded once. Cole left him with the medic and stepped outside. The cold was still waiting. He stood in it for a moment and looked at the sky, which had gone from the absolute dark of deep night to the specific dark that preceded dawn. Not lighter exactly, but different in quality. Like the sky was beginning to consider the possibility of morning without having committed to it yet. I was aware that he was tired in a way that was past the point where tired was a useful description. He was aware that his body had spent itself in service of something that had gone right, which was the best possible outcome, and that the going right had not been accidental, and that the person most responsible for the going right was currently completing operational documentation in a building 40 meters away, while everyone else was at the medical station or in the debrief preparation room. I thought about the chow hall. He thought about the helmet. He thought about himself standing in a room full of elite professionals, holding another person's equipment above his head and making a joke about dishwashing. And he felt the specific discomfort of a man who has done something that he cannot undo, but can only account for. Not guilt exactly, something more useful than guilt. The particular discomfort that produces change rather than just regret. I was still standing in the cold when Hound appeared beside him. Hound had the quality that truly experienced operators develop, the ability to arrive in a space without announcing the arrival, without requiring the other person to adjust to their presence, simply appearing as a natural extension of the existing landscape. Medical clear you, Hound asked. Mostly. Torch, boot, 2 weeks minimum. Hound absorbed this. He held together. He did. A beat of silence that was comfortable in the way silence between people who have been through the same night is comfortable. What are you thinking? Hound asked. Cole looked at the sky. About the chow hall. Hound said nothing. He didn't need to. I've spent 7 years, Cole said, believing I understood what this profession looked like, what the people in it looked like. I had a picture in my head, and I applied it, and it worked. Until tonight. The picture was wrong. The picture was incomplete. Cole paused. There's a difference. Wrong would mean I had to start over. Incomplete means I have to add something I was missing. Hound considered this with the patience of a man who was not in a hurry to fill silence with less than accurate things. What were you missing? He asked. Cole thought about 14 hours in a kitchen, about a crossing built from components that had no business being used that way, about a woman who had looked at 400 standing operators and walked out of a dining facility without once looking back to confirm that they were watching. I was looking at the surface, Cole said, call signs, rank, size, unit patches, the things that are visible from across a room. I thought I could read a person from across a room. He paused. She was sitting in a corner reading a book. No patches, no display, nothing that the picture I was using would have flagged as significant. And she was the most significant person in the room, Cole said. Has probably been the most significant person in every room she's been in for the last several years. And I walked over there and held her helmet up and made a joke about dishwashing. Hound was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you know what the thing is about call signs like hers? Cole waited. The people who earn that kind of call sign the ones that come from the worst moment instead of the best moment. They don't need you to understand it, Hound said. They already know what they did. The call sign isn't for them. It's for the people who were there. And the people who weren't there are going to have to either take it on faith or find out the hard way. I found out the hard way. Most people do, Hound said. The ones worth finding out about. The sky was definitely lighter now. Not dawn yet, but the promise of it, that particular shift from consideration to commitment that happened in the hour before sunrise when the darkness began losing its confidence. Cole looked at the building where Elena was working. I owe her an apology, he said. Yes, Hound agreed. You do. She's going to tell me it's not necessary. Probably. That's not going to stop me. Hound looked at him for a moment with an expression that Cole recognized as the closest thing to approval that Hound's face generally produced. No, Hound said, it isn't. They stood in the cold for another moment together. Then Hound said, get some sleep. Ridgeline, debrief is at 0900. You first. Hound almost smiled and walked away. Cole remained outside for another minute. I thought about the woman in the corner of the chow hall who had not looked up when he walked toward her, who had closed her book with the patience of someone who had already decided how this conversation was going to go and was simply waiting for him to catch up, who had said when he asked about the call sign something happened in a kitchen and offered nothing else, not because she was being evasive, but because that was the entire true story told in the most economical possible terms. Something happened in a kitchen. Yes, Cole thought. Something happened in a kitchen and 6 people came home because of it. And the people who were there gave the person responsible for it the most honest name they knew how to give. And that name was Dishes. And anyone who needed more than that to understand it was going to have to learn the way Cole had learned. The hard way, in the dark, following. He went inside. The debrief room was already being prepared by the intelligence staff who moved through their pre-debrief tasks with the efficient quiet of people who understood that the operators coming in at 0900 were going to be running on insufficient sleep and that the most valuable thing they could offer was accuracy and brevity. Cole found a bunk in the transient quarters and lay down without taking off his boots, because taking off his boots felt like a commitment to rest that he wasn't ready to make, while his mind was still running through the operation at operational speed. He stared at the ceiling. He ran through it again. The entry, the lower level, Hess with his flat information-only voice, the room with 11 people who had been holding themselves together on willpower and the hope that someone was coming. Mara and the wall that wasn't solid. The passage. The gap. Elena's hands moving through the construction of the crossing with the focused economy of someone who had already calculated the solution and was simply manifesting it in physical reality. He ran through it all the way to the ridgeline, to the 60 meters of exposure, to Elena's feet hitting the far side, to her closed eyes. 3 seconds, then open and already looking at the extraction route and already moving. Cole fell asleep at 0512. He slept until 0847, 13 minutes before the debrief. He was standing in the corridor outside the debrief room in clean clothes that didn't hurt to move in, which was an improvement over the clothes he'd been wearing for the last several hours, and his boots were now properly tied, which felt like a small act of respect for the proceedings ahead. He saw Elena come out of the operations center across the corridor. She was carrying a folder and moving with her characteristic purpose, and she had clearly slept, if she had slept at all, which Cole was not certain of in some compressed and efficient portion of the time between 0347 and now, because she looked like a person who was operating at full capacity rather than at the reduced capacity that Cole knew he himself was operating at, and he had slept for over 3 hours. She was moving past him toward the debrief room. He said, Captain Whitmore. She stopped, turned, looked at him with those gray eyes that classified things rapidly and accurately, and had classified him within the first 10 seconds of their first conversation in a way that he was only now fully understanding. Cole stood straight, not the performative straight of someone trying to make an impression, the actual straight of someone who was trying to communicate respect through posture, because posture was the most honest language available in that particular corridor at that particular moment. I owe you an apology, he said. Elena looked at him. She did not say it isn't necessary, which was what he had expected and had prepared for. She simply looked at him and waited, which was somehow harder. In the chow hall, Cole said, I picked up your helmet. I made a joke about the call sign in front of a room full of people. I judged you on visible information and I did it publicly and I was wrong. The corridor was quiet. Elena held his gaze. I've spent 7 years believing I understood what strength looked like, Cole continued. I thought I could read a person across a room. I thought the visible things, the unit patches, the call sign, the way someone carried themselves physically, I thought those things told the truth. He paused. They do, just not the whole truth. Elena said nothing. Cole kept going because he had not finished and she hadn't indicated that he should stop. You were sitting in a corner reading a book, no display, nothing that matched my picture. And I walked over and performed confidence at you, and you sat there and let me do it. And you didn't say a single thing to defend yourself, and later I understood why." He paused. "Because you didn't need to." Something moved in Elena's expression that was not quite a smile but occupied the same emotional territory. "What you did in that facility," Cole said, "the crossing, the route, the way you managed those 11 people, and this team simultaneously in conditions that—" He stopped, recalibrated. He was starting to describe the operation, and that wasn't what this was. "You could have let me walk back to my table in the chow hall and said nothing. You could have let it go." "I did let it go," Elena said. "I know." Cole held her gaze. "That's what I'm apologizing for making you have to do." A beat. The corridor was very quiet. Elena looked at him for a long moment with that same unhurried directness that she had applied to everything since the moment they met, to conversations, to corridors, to mountain passages, to gaps in the dark that had no obvious solution. Then she said, "Good soldiers learn staff sergeant." Cole recognized it. He had heard her say it to Torch in a different form, in a different context. The principle was the same. The application was direct and personal, and he received it as exactly what it was. "And great leaders teach," he said. Elena studied him for a beat that lasted long enough to mean something. Then she did something that Cole had not expected. She almost smiled. Not the performed version, not the diplomatic version, just the small, genuine, private version that didn't need to be seen from across a room to mean what it meant. "Don't be late to the debrief," she said. She walked past him toward the debrief room. Cole stood in the corridor for a moment and breathed. He felt something settle in his chest that he didn't have an immediate name for. Not relief, not pride, not the resolution of a social debt, though it was adjacent to all three. Something more durable than any of those. Something that felt like the beginning of an understanding that he would spend the next significant portion of his career building on one experience at a time, in the way that real understanding was always built. He straightened his collar, checked his watch. 4 minutes until debrief. He walked to the debrief room and took a seat 3 chairs from the front. Torch was already there, boot on his left leg, sitting with the particular upright posture of someone who was going to demonstrate at every possible opportunity that the boot was not impairing their participation in any meaningful way. Hound was 2 seats down, reviewing notes with the focused patience of a man who had slept exactly the right amount and was now fully operational in the way that some people manage to be fully operational after an extraordinarily demanding night. Mara was there too. She was sitting quietly at the end of the row, which was where she had sat in the passage, and where she had stood at the aircraft ramp, and where she had been in the room underground, the peripheral position that gave maximum observational access with minimum exposure. Cole noted this with the part of his mind that was always noting things, and filed it as a question that the debrief would either answer or confirm, as a question that would not be answered in this room. Elena came in last. She set her folder on the table. She looked at the assembled personnel with the same quiet full attention she had given to the team in the aircraft hangar the night before, moving across each face without rushing, confirming presence and readiness, in the particular quality of attention that a room either had or didn't. This room had it. She opened her folder. "Let's begin," she said. The debrief lasted 3 hours and 17 minutes. Cole had been in hundreds of after-action reviews across his career. He knew their rhythms, their language, their specific social dynamics, the way people position their accounts of what happened to protect their decisions, without appearing to protect them, the way junior personnel watch senior personnel before committing to a version of events, the way the debrief room developed its own internal weather based on how the mission had actually gone versus how it was supposed to have gone. This debrief was different. Not in structure. The structure was standard sequential account of events, identification of decision points, assessment of outcomes against objectives, documentation of deviations from plan and their consequences. Elena ran it the way she ran everything, without wasted motion, without performed authority, moving through each phase with the same focused precision that she had applied to the passage and the crossing and the 60 meters of exposed ridgeline. What was different was the honesty. Cole had never been in a debrief where people were that honest. When Torch got to the section about his knee, he didn't position it. He said, "At the 63-minute mark of movement, my knee crossed from manageable to non-functional." I did not report this at the threshold Captain Whitmore had specified. Staff Sergeant Harrington identified the change and moved me toward reporting it. That delay was my decision and my error. Elena looked at him. Noted. What would you do differently? Torch didn't hesitate. Report it when she told me to report it. Why didn't you? A beat, the honest kind, because I didn't want to be a liability. Elena held his gaze for a moment. You became a larger liability by not reporting it than you would have been by reporting it on schedule. The injury was manageable at 7. By the time it was reported, it was non-functional and required personnel reallocation in a constrained environment. She paused. The decision to hide a problem in a team context is always a larger problem than the original problem. Remember that. Torch nodded. Cole noted the way she had handled it, not punitive, not forgiving, just accurate. The same two qualities applied to everything. When Cole got to his section of the account, he reported the events at the gap crossing with the same precision he applied to everything else. He described the load management, the timing, the decision to carry Garcia through the passage on a single operator support rather than dual operator, because dual operator in the passage width was less efficient than single operator at reduced speed. Elena asked 2 clarifying questions and moved on. She did not reference the chow hall. She did not reference their conversation in the corridor. Whatever had happened between them in the last 12 hours outside of operational context stayed outside of operational context because that was how she operated. Everything in its correct compartment, addressed in its correct sequence, given exactly the weight it deserved and not 1 gram more. Cole respected this so completely that the respect almost hurt. Mara's section of the debrief was where the room changed temperature. She gave her account of the 4 days she had spent inside the facility with the flat, organized precision of someone who had been trained to observe and report. And as the account unfolded, Cole watched the faces of the operators around the table registered the same sequential realization that he was registering, that Mara was not a trapped civilian who happened to know the patrol schedule. Mara was never supposed to be there by accident. The research team had been extracting data related to a weapons network, and that network had a security apparatus that was more sophisticated than the satellite imagery had suggested. And Mara had been inside that facility not for 4 days, but for 11, working, gathering, and waiting for the window to move the information she had collected out through the passage she had already identified and prepared. She had known the team was coming because she had requested the team through channels that did not appear in any of the planning documents that Cole had been given access to. Elena looked at Mara across the table when the account finished. The data you collected, Elena said, is it intact? Mara reached into her jacket and placed a small device on the table. The room went very quiet. 11 days, Mara said. Everything they had, network structure, personnel, operational timeline. She paused, including the next phase. Caldwell, who had been sitting at the end of the table with the composed stillness of a man who had heard a great deal over his career and was very selective about what he allowed to show on his face, allowed something to show on his face. It was not a large expression, but from Caldwell it was significant. Elena looked at the device on the table for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked at Mara. You were going to go out through the passage alone, she said, before we arrived. Mara met her gaze. If the window had closed, yes. With 11 people in the next room who couldn't have followed you. A beat. Yes, Mara said. The room was very quiet. Cole watched Elena's face move through something that was not anger and was not judgment and was not the performed neutrality of someone suppressing both. It was something more complicated than any of those, the expression of someone who was holding 2 true things simultaneously that did not reconcile easily with each other and had decided that this particular table, at this particular debrief, was not the place to attempt the reconciliation. The mission parameters you were given, Elena said, were not the mission parameters you were given, Mara said. I know. We can discuss the implications of that through proper channels. We can, Mara agreed, after the data is secured. After the data is secured, Mara agreed. Elena picked up the device, handed it to Caldwell, looked at the room. That's the debrief. Documentation will be completed by 1800. Personnel will remain on base until the operational summary is cleared. She closed her folder. Questions. Nobody had questions. She stood. The room stood with her, not because they were ordered to. Cole was on his feet before he had decided to stand, and he looked left and right. And every person in the room was doing the same thing, rising from their chairs, in the same automatic, instinctive way that the chow hall had risen the night before, but smaller now, more personal, in a room with 20 people instead of 400, and somehow that made it more significant rather than less. Elena looked at the room. Something moved in her face that she did not attempt to hide and did not attempt to display. She nodded once. Then she walked out. Cole sat back down slowly. Torch was looking at him. "Did we just—" Torch started. "Yeah," Cole said. "We did." Torch looked at the door Elena had walked through. "Does she know we did that?" Cole thought about gray eyes that classified things accurately and rapidly and missed nothing within a 15-foot radius. "She knows," he said. "The operational summary was cleared at 1743. Personnel were released from base restriction at 1800, which meant that by 1830, the dining facility at Raven Ridge was filling up in the familiar way. The long tables, the plastic chairs, the fluorescent lights, the smell of coffee and boot rubber, and the particular institutional protein of military food service." Cole carried his tray to a table. He sat down. "I was aware that the chow hall looked exactly the same as it had looked 22 hours ago, which felt wrong in the way that unchanged things sometimes feel wrong after you have been through something that has changed you. The table was the same table. The lights were the same lights. The ambient noise of 400 people eating and talking and performing the social mathematics of elite military life was the same noise. He was not the same person. That was the part that required calibration. Hound sat down across from him with a tray, in the expression of a man who had slept adequately and eaten recently and was now at baseline operational capacity, which for Hound was a level that most people never reached on their best day. "You're thinking too loud," Hound said. "How can you tell? You've been staring at your food for 4 minutes without eating it." Cole looked at his tray, picked up a fork. "I keep seeing the room the way it was last night." "Before or after the code?" "Before." Cole set the fork down. "I walked across this room and picked up her helmet. I held it up." He looked at the corner table. She was sitting right there. Hound followed his gaze to the corner. The corner table was empty. "She'll be back," Hound said. "I know. And it'll look exactly the same as it did last night. Faded jacket, worn helmet, book with no cover, corner table." "I know," Cole said again. "Only difference is you," Hound said. "The room didn't change. The call sign didn't change. She didn't change. You changed." Cole ate a bite of food, chewed, swallowed. "When I was coming up," he said, "there was a master gunnery sergeant in my first unit, Montoya. He was the kind of person you noticed immediately because he wanted you to notice him, and he was very good at making that happen. Big presence, loud when he wanted to be loud, decorated. Everybody knew his name." Hound listened. "How was good," Cole said. "I learned things from him, real things. But the thing I learned most from him, the thing that stuck, was how to perform strength, how to make sure the room knew you were strong before you had to prove it." Cole paused. "That worked for 7 years. People saw me the way Montoya trained me to be seen. And last night nobody saw me. They saw her." Cole looked at the corner table again. She was sitting in a corner reading a book, and she was the most important person in the room, and she wasn't doing a single thing to make sure anyone knew it. Hound was quiet for a moment. "The best ones never do," he said. Cole nodded slowly. At 1912, the corner table was no longer empty. Elena came in the way she came into everything, without announcement, without the particular energy shift that people with performed presence generated when they entered a space. She carried her tray. She sat at the corner table. She put her helmet on the floor beside her chair. The word facing outward, the way it always faced, and she opened the damaged paperback to wherever she had left off. The chow hall noticed, not in the dramatic way it had noticed the night before. No code word, no speakers, no 400 chairs moving simultaneously. Just the particular quality of awareness that settled over a room. When someone in it was known to the people in it, a subtle orientation, a gravitational acknowledgement, the specific ambient respect of a professional community towards someone who had earned it at the level Elena Whitmore had earned it. Cole watched it happen. He watched Rangers 2 tables over straighten almost imperceptibly. He watched a Special Forces team sergeant, who he knew by reputation, glance toward the corner and look away with the quiet nod of someone confirming something they already knew. He watched the room do the thing the room did when she was in it, not perform deference, not display awareness, just simply know. He picked up his tray. He walked to her table. She did not look up immediately. Not because she hadn't noticed she had, he was certain of it, but because she was finishing a sentence in the book, completing the unit of meaning before allowing the interruption, the same way she completed every task before moving to the next one. Then she looked up. "Staff Sergeant." "Captain." Cole set his tray down. "Mind if I sit?" She studied him for a beat that was long enough to communicate that this was a genuine question, receiving a genuine assessment, and not a social formality. "Sit," she said. He sat. They ate in silence for a while, not the uncomfortable silence of two people who don't know what to say to each other. The more durable silence of two people who have been through something together and don't need to fill the space between them with noise to confirm that the something happened and that it mattered. After several minutes, Cole said, "I've been thinking about something." Elena turned a page. "The chow hall last night before the code. I made a joke about your call sign." He paused. The whole room heard it. "Yes." And then the whole room stood up. "Yes." Cole looked at his food. The timing of that, it must have looked. He stopped. "Did it ever bother you that I did that?" And then, 30 seconds later, the room stood up, and you walked out, and I was just standing there holding your water bottle looking like... Elena looked up from her book. For the first time in their entire acquaintance, she laughed. Not loudly, not for the room, not performed, just the genuine, private, entirely human laugh of a person who has just heard something that struck an honest note in a place where honest notes resonated. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. When it finished, she looked at Cole with an expression that was the most open he had seen on her face since the debrief room, when she had nodded at the standing room and allowed something private and real to move across her features. "You were holding your coffee cup," she said. "What?" "You weren't holding my water bottle. You were holding your coffee cup." A pause. "You looked like a man who had just been informed that the building he was standing in was significantly more important than he had understood it to be." Cole felt the corner of his mouth move. "That's accurate." "It is," she agreed. They ate in silence for another moment. Then Cole said, "What was it actually like in the compound 2 years ago?" Elena was quiet. He had not expected her to answer. He had asked the way a person sometimes asks a question that they do not genuinely expect to have answered, because the asking itself is a form of acknowledgement, a way of saying, "I know this happened, and I know it matters, and I am not pretending otherwise." But she answered. Not immediately. She set down her fork. She looked at the table for a moment in a way that was not evasion, but was the specific look of someone deciding how much of a true thing to share with someone they have recently decided is worth sharing it with. "My team was 6 people," she said. 4 men, 2 women. Best unit I'd ever worked with. We went in on a 36-hour extraction timeline, and at the 4-hour mark, everything that could fail had failed." She paused. "No communications, no weapons after the first breach. We had what we were carrying, and that ran out. No extraction route, hostile force surrounding the compound with no indication they were leaving." Cole said nothing. "We ended up in the kitchen because it was the only room in the building with 2 entry points in a structure that gave us something to work with." She picked up her water bottle. "I spent the next 14 hours figuring out what the kitchen could do that it wasn't designed to do." She looked at him directly. Every piece of equipment in that room became something it wasn't supposed to be. Every structure became cover, or a barrier, or a tool. I had 6 people looking at me every time they needed a decision, and I made the decision and we moved to the next one." Cole held her gaze. "At the 14-hour mark, extraction reached us," she said. "All 6 people walked out." She set down the water bottle. "The kitchen did not look the same when we left as it did when we arrived." The chow hall hummed around them. Cole sat with what she had said for a long moment. "Dishes," he said finally. "Dishes," she agreed. "Not a joke. Never a joke. A true name." She looked at him with those gray eyes. "The truest kind. The kind you don't choose. The kind the people who were there give you because they need a word for something that doesn't have one yet." Cole thought about Hound's words from the night before. The call sign isn't for them. It's for the people who were there. The people who weren't there, Cole said, are going to have to either take it on faith or find out the hard way. Elena looked at him slightly differently than she had been looking at him. Hound, she said, on the aircraft. She almost smiled. He's been saying some version of that for as long as I've known him. Has he always been right? About that, she picked up her book again. Always. They finished dinner mostly in silence after that, but the silence had a different quality now. Not the silence of strangers or the silence of people who have completed their necessary exchange and are tolerating proximity, but the silence of people who have arrived somewhere together and are both aware of having arrived. At 2024, Cole stood to take his tray. He paused. Captain Whitmore. She looked up. Thank you, he said, for the operation, for what you did in that passage, for not telling me in the chow hall last night what you could have told me. Elena looked at him steadily. What could I have told you? Enough to make me feel significantly smaller than I already felt after the room stood up. She considered this. That would have been efficient, she said. It wouldn't have been useful. Why not? Because you telling you is permanent, she said. Me telling you lasts until the next time your confidence gets ahead of your information. She held his gaze. You figured it out. That version stays. Cole stood for a moment. Good soldiers learn, he said. Yes, she said. They do. He picked up his tray. He walked back across the chow hall. He put the tray on the return rack and stood at the edge of the room for a moment, the way he had stood outside in the cold at 0400 that morning, not going anywhere immediately, just standing in the fact of where he was and what the last 24 hours had produced in him. The corner table was visible from where he stood. Elena had gone back to her book. The helmet was on the floor beside her chair. The single word faced outward. In the weeks that followed Operation IRONVEIL, Cole noticed something happening at Raven Ridge that he could not have predicted and that he suspected no one had planned. The call sign stopped being something people didn't know about, not because Elena talked about it. She didn't. She never talked about herself in the currency of her own achievements, which was something Cole now understood as a feature rather than an absence. A deliberate choice made by someone who had decided long ago that her record spoke in a language that didn't require her to translate it for anyone. The call sign spread the way true things spread in professional communities, not through announcement, but through the accumulation of small moments in which people who had seen the thing told people who hadn't, and the people who hadn't found themselves wanting to understand it. And the understanding produced a specific kind of respect that no briefing document or commendation citation could have produced. Cole was the primary reason, not because he stood up and made speeches, not because he told the story of the kitchen, which was not his story to tell, but because of the way he changed after that night, and because the people around him noticed the change, and because when they asked him about it, he told the truth. He had misjudged someone. He had done it publicly, and the person he misjudged had led him through a situation that clarified every misunderstanding he'd had about what leadership and strength actually looked like in their most honest form. That was all he said. It was enough. Torch came back from his 2-week boot restriction with a different relationship to his own limitations than he'd had before. Not the relationship of someone who hid problems until they became crises, but the relationship of someone who had learned in real conditions what the cost of that approach was. His knee healed. His instinct to report early rather than late did not require further instruction. Hound completed his rotation and transferred to a different assignment, the way Hound always eventually transferred, moving through the professional landscape of special operations like a person who understood that the work was the constant and the location was the variable. He and Cole shook hands at 0600 on a Tuesday morning outside the transient quarters. Same, Hound said. Same, Cole agreed. Which meant I'll see you wherever the work takes us next in whatever form that takes, and we will both know what the other has done without needing to describe it, because that is how this works. Mara's data was processed through channels that Cole was not read into and produced outcomes that he heard about only in the way that operators hear about things that happen above their classification level, in the particular quality of quiet that settles over a command structure when something significant has been resolved, a quiet that is distinct from the ordinary quiet of nothing happening. Dr. Raymond Hess sent a letter, not an email, a physical letter handwritten addressed to Captain Elena Whitmore at Raven Ridge, which arrived in the base mail system 6 weeks after the operation and which Cole knew about only because Elena mentioned it in passing during a planning session for a subsequent training exercise in the same way she mentioned everything as information precisely calibrated without embellishment. The research team sent a letter, she said. Hess, Cole asked. Hess. She moved on to the next item on the planning agenda. Cole didn't ask what it said. He didn't need to. Some things were complete in themselves. 4 months after Operation IRONVEIL, new operators rotated into Raven Ridge. They were good. The rotation process ensured that people who arrived at Raven Ridge were already exceptional by any standard that the previous world had prepared them for, and they arrived with the confidence of people who had been told correctly that they had earned their place. They came into the chow hall. The way people always came into the chow hall at Raven Ridge, with the particular energy of elite professionals who were still in the process of learning the specific landscape of this specific installation, reading the social topography of the room with the professional awareness that had been trained into them. One of them, a young ranger, sharp-eyed and straight-backed, the kind of person who reminded Cole of himself at 23, which was a specific kind of uncomfortable recognition, stopped near Cole's table on his way across the room. He was looking at the corner, at the faded jacket, at the helmet on the floor, at the single word. Cole watched him read it. Watched the expression move across his face, the confusion, the recalibration, the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. That was the beginning of the same joke that Cole had made 4 months ago in this same room. Cole said quietly, "Ranger." The young man looked at him. "Come sit down," Cole said. The ranger looked uncertain for a moment, the particular uncertainty of a junior person being addressed by a senior person in an ambiguous tone in a public space. He came and sat down. Cole looked at him for a moment. "You were looking at the corner table," he said. "Yes, sir." The call sign, a beat. "It's unusual." "Yes," Cole said, "it is." He paused. "Do you want to know what it means?" The ranger looked at the corner table again, then back at Cole. "Yes, sir." Cole thought about how to begin. "I thought about 14 hours in a kitchen, about 6 people who walked out, about a passage in the dark and a gap with no visible bottom, and a crossing built from components that had no business being used that way. About 60 meters of exposed ridgeline in the November cold, and feet touching the far side, and 3 seconds of closed eyes and then immediately looking forward. I thought about a chow hall and a laugh that had traveled across a room and landed on a woman who had not flinched, about the sound of 400 chairs, about gray eyes that classified things accurately and missed nothing. He thought about what Hound had said. The people who weren't there are going to have to either take it on faith or find out the hard way." Cole looked at the young ranger. "Here's what I can tell you," he said, "and then the rest you're going to have to figure out on your own," he told him. "Not all of it, not the kitchen that was Elena's to tell or not tell as she chose, but the truth of the call sign in the broad and honest terms that the truth deserved, that the word on that helmet came from the worst situation a team could face, and that the person wearing it had turned the worst situation into the only outcome that mattered, and that every person in this facility who knew the name knew exactly what it cost and exactly what it proved, and that was why the room stood when the code was called, and that was the only why there was." The ranger listened. He didn't say anything when Cole finished. He looked at the corner table for a long moment. Then he stood up. "Thank you, sir," he said. He picked up his tray and moved toward a table across the room, and Cole watched him go and watched him sit down with his unit and watched the particular quality of attention he brought to the room from that point forward, a quality that was different from the attention he'd had when he walked in, quieter and more specific, the attention of someone who had just understood that visible things were the beginning of a story, not the whole of it. Cole turned back to his meal. Across the room in the corner, Lena Whitmore turned a page. She had not looked up during the exchange. She did not look up now. She simply sat in the corner of the dining facility at Forward Operating Base Raven Ridge, reading a book with no cover. Her helmet on the floor beside her chair. The call sign facing outward the way it always faced. One word. Dishes. True in the way that only names given by people who were there can be true. Permanent in the way that only things earned in the worst possible moment can be permanent. Quiet in the way that real strength is always quiet because real strength has nothing left to prove, and nowhere to prove it, and no one to prove it, to only the work ahead and the team beside it in the next mission waiting in the dark. That was the meaning of Iron Veil, Not the operation, not the code, the person. And every operator who ever served at Raven Ridge after that night carried it with them, not as a story to tell, but as a standard to measure themselves against. A reminder permanent and unambiguous that the most dangerous person in any room is rarely the loudest one, that the truest names come from the hardest moments, that strength does not announce itself, does not explain itself, does not defend itself against the laugh of a man who hasn't yet learned what he doesn't know. It simply sits in the corner and reads its book. And when the code comes, it stands up, and the room stands with it.